Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, Mysterious Voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about hitmen and drug deals gone awry. I am referring to No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, which was published in 2005. I've talked about Cormac McCarthy on this channel before, so I don't need to go into that great of detail. But for those who don't know, Cormac was an American writer, having written since the 1980s, all the way into the present day. Unfortunately, he died in this year, in June of this year, of 2023, at the time that I am talking right now. So his death is fresh in the memory of many an American. But he was known for writing noir westerns or classic westerns or revisionist westerns, whatever you prefer to call them. He wrote the Border trilogy, which was like All the Pretty Horses and a couple other books. He wrote Blood Meridian, which is one of my favorite, and then he also wrote a couple of other stories and short stories as well. And he's very well regarded for his work, being considered somewhat of a realist and portraying the world for how dirty and violent it can actually be. Very much a fan of his work after reading Blood Meridian. So I was very much looking forward to reading No Country when I found it at a bookstore, Powell's bookstore in Portland, to be specific. So I'm going to talk about this book. I'm not going to spoil it in the summary section, but I will do some spoilers in the analysis section. So if you're going to read it and you don't want to be spoiled, go out and read it and then come back and watch this video and let's have a discussion in the comments below. But without further ado, let's talk about this book. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So, No Country for Old Men focuses on a couple different characters, but it primarily focuses on Llewelyn Moss. He is a man from the Southwest, a Vietnam War veteran, and also a hunter. At the start of the story, he is hunting in the presumably Texas wilderness when he comes across a drug deal gone awry. Some drug dealers are dead, and he finds a briefcase full of $2 million, which he then takes home, hides from his wife. And then the next day he goes back to see, if anyone's noticed. And there are two gunmen there who are waiting for him. He manages to escape, but he leaves his truck there, which is discovered by both the hitman, Anton Chigurh, who is tasked with getting the money back and killing everyone who knows about it, and Sheriff Bell, who is very well acquainted with Moss, but he's trying to bring Moss in before the other people get to him, and he just has general questions about what Moss was doing at the scene of the crime. Chigurh continues to hunt Moss while Bell follows along and finding all the blood and the bodies that are left in the wake. Chigurh uses a receiver transponder sort of thing that's in the briefcase that Moss is carrying to track him down to a motel, and Moss realizes too late what's happening there. He disposes of it, and a shootout happens. Chigurh shoots Moss in the back, which only slightly wounds him, and Moss manages to run all the way into Mexico across the border and get help from a doctor there, while Chigurh, shoots the remaining gunmen who are at the scene, who are also looking for Moss. While Moss is in Mexico, he runs into a man named Wells, who was tasked with also getting the money back and killing Chigurh because he's causing a bit of a scene. And Wells tells him, you can work with me and give me the money back, or Chigurh can get to you and kill you and potentially your entire family. The choice is yours. Unfortunately, Wells goes back across the border and back to the motel, and Chigurh is there waiting for him, and monologues to him about how this is all his fault and the choice of consequences and all kinds of things like that. And then he kills Wells, and he takes his phone and calls Moss, and he tells Moss to give him back the money, and this will end for him there because he'll kill him, and he won't kill Moss's wife. Moss questions whether he's actually going to do that, and notes that Chigurh is not really going to get the money, and then he hangs up, and Moss proceeds to continue to run again with Chigurh not too far behind him. Moss even picks up a hitchhiker woman, and they develop somewhat of a close relationship. Although it doesn't seem like he's that romantically interested in her. And he also calls his wife up and tells her to flee from where she's at so that nobody hurts her. And from there, the rest of the story takes place. Again, I will not spoil it here, but as a reminder, I will spoil it in the analysis section. And so that's pretty much what the story is there. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit to talk about with No Country for Old Men. While it is not at the same level as Blood Meridian, and after all, few stories actually are, it is still very good. And I've come to sort of understand that it's part of a sort of maybe a secret trilogy. Maybe it's in my own mind, but a trilogy of books where McCarthy's talking about the past, the present, and the future. Blood Meridian being the past, the violent past. No Country for Old Men being the violent present, or about the violent 1980s, as close to the present as you can get, given this took place or this was written in 2005. And then The Road, which I consider maybe the violent future. Whether or not that's actually that, I still have to read the book. That remains to be seen. But it's clear one of the themes that McCarthy is talking about here is that of the violent present. McCarthy paints a picture of another lawless, violent corner of the U.S. In Blood Meridian, it was the Mexico border region around Arizona and whatnot. But in No Country for Old Men, he paints a violent picture of the sort of Texas border region of Texas in general, especially in the 1980s. It's very similar to Blood Meridian, whereas that focused on the Old West and how violent it was and how everyone's either a killer or a victim in some way. Here, it's much of the same way. Everyone's either a ruthless killer, or they're lamenting ruthless killers, or they've already been killed by the killers. You see hitmen and gangsters run amok, especially Anton Chigurh and the Mexican gangsters, Mexican drug dealers who are trying to get their drugs back. There's very few actually innocent men in this story. You could argue that the sheriff is innocent, but even he laments that he's like a tool for the state, and that sometimes he puts innocent men to death for the sake of closing cases and whatnot. And he also laments that when he served in World War II, his entire unit died and he ran away. It's noted that he had to run away or he would have died too, but he still feels incredibly guilty about that, so he doesn't consider himself an innocent. And even Llewelyn, he took money that wasn't his and is taunting a killer and whatnot, so he's not entirely clean himself. He also served in Vietnam, for what that's worth. So there's very few actually innocent people in this book, at least according to McCarthy. But what's also interesting, he paints this picture, but what does he attribute it to? Why is this world the way it is? In Blood Meridian, it's because that's our heritage. It's a colonialist empire is only going to be more violent, is only going to lead to more violence. It's gonna whoever has the most toys, whoever kills the most people wins and is able to stake their claim to the world. But here McCarthy seems to argue that the reason for this violence is because the slowly eroding morals in this country, which is an incredibly old man thing to say. Multiple characters note that people don't say their prayers, or people don't talk about Jesus anymore. And I think even the sheriff says there's no yes sir or no sir or ma'am or please anymore. And so that's what's leading to the violence. There's a lack of Jesus, a lack of religion, a lack of stability in in the world, and it might not have just started now. It might have been going for a pretty long time. Which, sure, that's a fine explanation and whatnot. Maybe that is the case, but at the same time, it kind of sounds like a conservative nightmare. That it's something that you hear from many conservatives of the eroding morals, eroding values, how gays are getting married, and so this is contributing to the bad state of the world, or immigration is bad or whatnot. It sounds like a stodgy old man complaining about the way of the world, given the person who's saying it is a stodgy old man. In the story, the sheriff is pretty old. So it sounds like that, like this conservative nightmare about why the world has gone wrong. And if that's the way that McCarthy views it, he's kind of inaccurate in a lot of ways, because in Blood Meridian, he showed that the violence was a result of a sense of nihilism, a growing nihilism, a growing tolerance to the death and suffering to others. Now, you could say that the world of No Country for Old Men is definitely the same world shared by Blood Meridian. That this violence in the past is America's reckoning coming forward to the future, to the present day. That the country didn't simply become violent overnight. This has been going on for years and years and years. An imperialist, colonialist empire is bound to turn into something like this sooner or later, where it no longer cares about its people, and it actively encourages suffering and hardship. You see that in Florida, of all places, where people if you have COVID, it's no big deal, or Republicans aren't doing anything about gun violence in America, where all this suffering is encouraged because they want to it's grievance politics. They want to get back at the liberals who made them feel small and insecure with their talk of racism and inequality in the world. And in that way, I can see McCarthy, this sort of being a point here that McCarthy is making, where it's not the case that the morals are the problem, but this is how conservatives view the world. That it's a conservative seeing the world and saying this is a problem because of lack of morals, rather than systematic inequality, rather than something that was created by politicians. That the human thresher machine that exists, the creation of that is what is leading to this violent present. Something that happened in Blood Meridian is continuing to the present day, as I've said before. I feel like it's no coincidence that this takes place in the 1980s in the story, at a time when Reagan's careless politics was leading to a lot of harm in many areas of the country. And especially his immigration politics and his war on drugs led to this further damage, because people had to funnel drugs into the country, and that created a violent cartel-based system as well. So maybe that's what McCarthy is getting at. I feel like he's a very intelligent writer who might be getting at that, but it's also very well likely that this could just be him being a stodgy old man. After all, years had passed since Blood Meridian, so he might have just evolved into this person who viewed the world this way. If it's that, I feel like I have to give this story less credit, but I'm choosing to believe that McCarthy's being smarter, and he's sort of calling attention to conservative politics and how that led to the dangerous state of the world, and how there's a lot of suffering and violence in it now. Another thing worth talking about in this story is Anton Chigurh. He is a fascinating character, and I first heard about him because he's in the popular culture now because of the movie No Country for Old Men, which I haven't seen, but I'm very much going to after reading this book. But he's viewed as such a lively, iconic kind of character for his violence and his sort of worldview. And I think McCarthy does a great job of characterizing him as an emotionless hitman watching the destinies of others. He's a very dangerous man because he commits violence and whatnot. But the thing that's the most dangerous about him is that he only cares about doing his job. He's focused on fate and consequences more than anything else. It's not him that's killing you. Sure, he's firing the trigger, but this is just fate. This is just the consequences of your actions. You are making him do this. If you had simply decided differently, your thread would have gone differently, and he wouldn't have crossed paths with you in your life. He's blaming you for him killing you, which you can see all sorts of terrible terrible like arguments there. And I think Carla Jane, who is Moss's wife in the story, who Anton kills at the very end because he had made a promise, he even blames her, and she just sobs, and she tries to argue against it. Like, no one is forcing you to kill me. And he's like, yes, the world is forcing me to kill you because of the decisions you made. And you can see this kind of worldview is hard to argue against because he's so set in it, and he's so emotionless that you can't appeal to someone like him. And at one point he says what a quote that I've heard before based on the popularity of Anton Chigurh as a character, but if your rules led you to this point, of what purpose was the rule? Like, so logical and cold that it's hard to really defeat someone like that. Like, it seems like he's pure evil, but the real evil of him is him convincing you that this is unavoidable, that he has to kill you to satisfy some element of fate or whatnot. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. I had no say in the matter. Every moment in your life is a turning and every one a choosing. Somewhere you made a choice. All follow to this. The accounting is scrupulous. The shape is drawn. No line can be erased. I had no belief in your ability to move a coin to your bidding. How could you? A person's path through the world seldom changes, and even more seldom will it change abruptly, and the shape of your path was visible from the beginning. She sat sobbing. She shook her head. Yet, even though I could have told you how all of this would end, I thought it not too much to ask that you have a final glimpse of hope in the world to lift your heart before the shroud drops. The darkness, do you see? And from there, Carla Jane, who Anton is tormenting at this point, starts crying and sobbing. Like, she sees his point. Like, he's saying that, like, these are the consequences of your action. But also, it seems like he's saying that it's fate. Like, there is no arguing in any of this. Like, you were set down a path because of a choice you made, and that meant that this was always going to happen. And, when he flips a coin, he's essentially saying, like, I'm offering you a glimpse of hope in this shroud of darkness, maybe how death is unavoidable or something like that. And it's like maybe he knows ultimately that he's still going to kill them, but like he'd still like to offer some hope to make you think that it was your choice in the matter. And Carla does make a choice. Like, she says, I'm not going to decide on a coin flip, but then she says, oh, heads, so indicating that maybe she does buy into that glimpse of hope a little bit. There's a lot to talk about with his coin flip, but I'll leave that to another person. Comment below if you personally have thoughts on his choice of coin flipping and whatnot. But there is a bigger question at play, like, what does Anton represent? And I think this is another thing where you could spend hours talking about it. You could argue that he's like a shepherd of fate because he talks about fate so much. You could say he's not killing you, he's just ushering forth what faith was always going to bring, or fate or something like. Yeah, so also he could represent death, but that feels a bit like of a simple and easy answer. He's the conservative evil because he's described as exotic, like a brown man who's vicious and evil, coming to kill everyone in his path. It's kind of what Republicans want you to believe that all immigrants are. And he's also, you could also see him as like America's reckoning. Like, for all the violence of our past and all the sort of lack of care and caution we paid to how we handle others, here is a man who is coming to kill everyone and do it indiscriminately as well. Essentially America's reckoning. He's very similar to the judge from Blood Meridian. The judge was a nihilist who also believed that he was somehow God, that he controlled his entire world, and he wanted control over everything. And Anton is very similar. But whereas with the judge, you get some insight into that in his mind and whatnot, and in the twisted ways that he thinks and what he does to people, Anton doesn't really particularly care about anything enough to have an opinion on it. All he wants to do is his job. He's focused on that, and he's focused on bringing people down and potentially getting more jobs in the future. But like in that way, like, fate is his god, and there's nothing else but fate and consequences. And so he kills anyone who can potentially like affect his own fate. I think in a lot of ways he resembles the judge, but he's also a little bit different. But again, it shows the somewhat similarities between this and Blood Meridian again. Other great things about this book are the use of tension, especially in the chapters where like Chigurh is facing off against someone else, especially Moss. You have the tension of wondering if say like Moss is really gonna make it out. It builds up, and then finally it releases, unfortunately, and it ends with Moss dying and not being able to escape this sort of fate that Chigurh says was always coming towards him. I really like how McCarthy uses tension in this way to really get you hooked into the story. And I also like the use of the setting here of the 80s Southwest. I do think it's intentional because, again, Reagan's America and whatnot. Yeah, I think it's a great addition to like what Blood Meridian had with this like hellish kind of landscape. A lot of that is going on with this story too. Feels very isolated from the rest of the country. Like, does the rest of the country even know this is taking place? It probably doesn't. It's cut off from the rest of the world, and you're just left with these crazed maniacs trying to hunt people down for money. Of course, there's a couple issues with this story as well. I do think it's a little too focused on morality. If that is what Cormac McCarthy is talking about here, I think he dwells too much in that morality and comes off as a stodgy old man. Of course, if he's not talking about morality in that way that I think he is, then it's not really much of a complaint there. But it is something that kind of sinks the story if he's sincere in that complaint about the lack of morality in the world. Also, there's an issue with Llewelyn in that he marries his wife Carla Jane, but later in the story we find out that he was a Vietnam War veteran, and he was also 33 when he got married, and they've been married for 3 years, and Carla Jane says she's 19, which means she got married at 16. A 33-year-old marrying a 16-year-old feels very weird. I know it's the 1980s, but it's kind of weird regardless of what era it's in. So it's weird that that Cormac wrote that type of relationship into his story. And then I also think the ending kind of drags on. You have the point where Chigurh kills Carla Jane, and then he flees after getting hit by a car, and then the 30 more pages happen where the sheriff just goes on to complain about the fear of what's coming for America and the morality, and also what happened to him in World War II. And I feel like this story wasn't really about the sheriff. It was more so about Moss and Chigurh. So once they're out of the picture, it just feels like what's the purpose here? What are we really doing? So I feel like the ending, the book kind of suffers because the ending is dragged on there. Anyway, those are my thoughts on No Country for Old Men, a really good book about violence in America, and a fun story about a drug dealer seeking to get back his money, or a hitman seeking to get back some money. I definitely recommend it to you out there. It's a really solid book. I might not like it as much as Blood Meridian, but I still like it. It's still a lot better than some of the other things I've been reading as of late, and it makes me want to check out more of Cormac's work. Probably The Road next, because it just feels like the natural conclusion of this imagined trilogy that I'm on. It's possible that The Road isn't about what I think it's about, so we'll all be surprised there then. If you have any thoughts about my review, or you just want to comment on something I said here, do so below. I would love to hear from you and have a conversation with you about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author if they don't already know, and join the Discord if you want to have a conversation about literature, movies, or games, or whatnot. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and hitman-like travels. Farewell.